Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Jim Elliott, Editorial Director for Publishers Weekly, and you've tuned in to Beyond the Deal, Managing Rights. We've put together a stellar panel here that's going to talk all about what's new in rights and rights management, especially in the use of technology. And before we delve into the meeting, a few housekeeping matters. To start with, we're going to be launching a poll any second now. If you could take a few seconds to fill that out, that'd be very helpful. The entire webinar will be recorded, so I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. And when we wrap things up, there'll be a brief survey that I will remind you to fill out before we close the deal. We'll close the deal. There you go. Without further ado, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Virtual Sales, who's backing this effort. And the format we're going to take today is I am going to introduce at the beginning here our four speakers as a way to help things go a little smoother, not to interrupt the flow once we get rolling. And then we'll hear from them. I'll toss out a few questions, and we'll have Q&A available for all our watchers today. So without further ado, kicking it off will be Bill Rosenblatt, who's president of Giant Steps Media Technology Strategies, a consulting firm he founded in 2000. He's a globally recognized authority on technical issues pertaining to intellectual property in the digital age. Bill is the author of books published by Wiley and O'Reilly Media, and several white papers, including one published by Book Industry Study Group pertaining to rights that I think you'll be seeing some highlights from. So we'll look for Bill in a minute or so. Following that will be Karen Pelez, who's subsidiary rights manager at Harvard University Press. Press I don't think needs too much introduction for publishing some really leading things in various categories. Karen negotiates all licenses for Harvard's entire catalog, from translations to films, and is responsible for growing business in both existing and new markets. At Harvard, she has spearheaded efforts to solve complex technical problems with robust data-driven solutions, from workflow management to royalties tracking and calculations. And then we'll have Becky Hepperly, who's VP of Contracts, Rights and Royalties at Candlewick Press, and serves as the Director of Royalties and Business Information Systems for Candlewick's parent company, Walker. Becky is also negotiating head of contracts, subsidiary rights agreements, and handles royalty payments to authors, illustrators, and agents. And batting cleanup will be Chris Kleeman, president of Kleeman and Company, which advises companies on strategies for maximizing reach and revenue generator from their publishing programs. Some clients include American Chemical Society, Highlights for Children, and Humble Bundle. Prior to forming her own consulting firm, Chris was one of the best known rights directors in the business, where she headed up global rights for Wiley. Okay, so we've got the cast set. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Rosenblatt. Bill, the stage is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jim. And thanks to Virtue Sales and your fine publication for inviting me to speak here. My name is Bill Rosenblatt. I am a consultant, and my firm is called Giant Steps Media Technology Strategies. So I'm going to share my screen, and you should see some slides. Can someone give me a thumbs up that the slides are up? Thank you. All right. So I'm going to talk to you this morning about a study that my firm did for the Book Industry Study Group over the past summer on the return on investment ROI of rights management solutions. And I have been a member of the rights committee of BISG. Chris Kleeman is also a member, and there are other people here who are involved with that. And we've been working on standards initiatives in BISG for rights, such as a controlled vocabulary that Chris, in fact, has been working a lot on. And you may hear something about that. But there's been a concern about, well, who cares? We have a controlled vocabulary, but what would we use it for? What's the business point of it? And there's been a long history of, in rights management, there's a recognized need for better rights management systems, by which I mean people as well as technology and processes. but not much understanding of the financial benefit for improving your rights management systems. And so, and I've been in this field for over 20 years, and I've seen this myself in various contexts. So we did a study that BISG organized about the ROI in rights management. BISG had done a survey that showed quantitatively that publishers are interested in improving their rights management. They see the benefit, but on the other hand, they're not really planning so much to invest in improved or new systems. And so there's a gap between the perceived need and plans to invest. And so our objective here was to create credible and useful estimates of ROI. And the way we went about it is we went through a process, which I won't get into here, of defining what we call ROI buckets, which are categories for benefits, financial benefits of rights management. And then we held a series of in-depth multi-hour interviews with rights management executives from various publishing companies up and down the spectrum. And we worked with them to quantify numerically the benefits of rights management that they have enjoyed from their systems. And then we compiled and analyzed the results. So we did a total of 16 in-depth interviews of people at 13 companies whose identities are remaining confidential, but they do span different segments of publishing, as you see here, with a slight emphasis on trade, but also representation from academic publishing, STM, professional, educational, and also literary agencies who, of course, focus on trade, and revenues that span low revenues to huge revenues. So we came up with these 8 ROI buckets. And I should also mention that the full report is available to anyone who wants to get it. And the folks from Virtue Sales later in this webinar will tell you how you can get a copy through BISG, which normally charges for them if you're not a member. So that's a nice benefit of attending this webinar. So there are 8 buckets. 5 on the incremental revenue side, and then 3 on the cost efficiency side. So under incremental revenue, there's revenue from new licensing deals that are enabled by rights management systems. 2 is better data analytics that enable you to uncover opportunities for incremental revenue. Number 3 is staff productivity. You've got a staff of rights and licensing people. You make them more productive so that they can process more deals. Then number 4 is actually a cash flow benefit, not really a revenue benefit. It's just tracking your payments so that you can get paid at all or get paid more quickly. And then being able to process a volume of contracts that's higher than what you were able to process before. Some of these do overlap a little bit, but it's just designed to make sure that we capture whatever people are experiencing among the interviewees. On the cost efficiency side, there's contract creation and maintenance. It's more efficient to create and maintain contracts, so that can be considered also as a cost efficiency. The tasks of clearance, rights clearance, and permissions management and things like that get to be cheaper to do. And then particularly in higher ed, there's a lot of license in analysis that gets done. Textbooks typically have to license in a lot of different content items, so good rights management systems make that process easier and cheaper. So I'm going to go very quickly through the next few slides, which show some of the sort of bullet points that we pulled for each of these buckets. I'm not going to go through these in depth because we don't have time, but again, you'll be able to get your hands on the report, which will go into all of these. So just to give you a few like scattered ideas of what we found. Under new licensing deals, one quote that someone said was, "Smaller deals became justifiable or not based on seeing the history of deals," which you can see in a rights management solution. So a mid-sized trade publisher told us that they were able to increase licensing revenue from 8 to 15% of total revenue. So if you think about the size of a mid-sized trade publisher, might be in the hundreds of millions, low hundreds of millions in revenue, let's say, or maybe high tens of millions of revenue. That's a lot of money. That's low millions. That's a few $1 million incremental revenue over a period of 5 years. That very, very easily and many times over pays for whatever system they had. Another mid-sized trade publisher found that they could get 5 to 10 new deals per year by looking at new geographic territories. That's not that big of a financial gain, but it's something that is scalable. And we've had other results like that. And I'll just give you a couple other examples here. Let's see. All right, okay. Staff productivity. Let's see, an STM publisher that started using a third-party online licensing agency, and some of you who are in the STM world might know who I'm referring to, that enabled them to process a volume of permission sales that was much greater than what they could process in-house, equivalent to a staff of 15 people at about half the cost based on what they're paying this third party. And this, enables them to incrementally make a couple $1 million a year. So that's significant, even though this is a large publisher. Let's see. Here's another one of my favorites on the licensing in analysis. There was a large educational publisher that told us that they could, by analyzing what they're already licensing in, when they get a request, we need this, let's say, an illustration for a textbook. And we want to license it in, it'll cost us X dollars. And then someone who can easily look up, oh, we already have a license to that. Or we already have a license to something that you could use instead. That's a cost savings. And they found that of the 150,000 assets that they license in per year, they could avoid paying for 10% of them, which is a lot, because even at a couple $100 each, that adds up to millions per year. So those are just a couple of examples of what we found. And now I want to talk to you about, for each segment of the publishing industry, here are the most beneficial use cases for improved rights management. For trade publishing, we found that subright sales was a beneficial use case through data analysis that enabled you to optimize pricing, places where you could get away with charging more. You didn't realize that until you looked at the data. Permission sales, the ability to create self-service portals to purchase permissions instead of having to go through a manual process by calling someone up and filling out some paperwork. In the STM and professional world, let me turn the radiator off here. Okay, there we go. I think that was getting noisy. In the STM and professional world, we found a lot of evidence of increased deal capacity through better staff productivity, and typically that's through the use of a third-party licensing agency, and also data analysis to find opportunities for licensing and pricing optimization. In academic publishing, once again, the use of an online licensing agency enabled more cost efficiency and or revenue, depending on how you look at it. In higher ed, we already talked about licensing inefficiency that could scale across many, many assets per year that typically higher ed publishers license in. And related to that is data analysis that you can do with these solutions to find opportunities to avoid licensing in that you don't need to do, that you would otherwise be doing because you don't know any better. And then for literary agencies, what we saw particularly was increased capacity for foreign rights deals. You can do more deals just because you have better information. And then cash flow is important to agencies because they handle payments for lots of authors, and for systems that do just simple things like automated payment reminders, there's a benefit there. So we crunched some numbers, and then these are just some figures of relative financial impact by segment. And this is relative to annual revenues that we either were given or estimated if they're not public information. And you can see here, if you look at these numbers, these are data points. They're almost anecdata. It's not like this is an exhaustive survey, particularly if you're talking about large publishers where we didn't talk to absolutely everybody who's involved with rights. We talked to maybe 2 or 3 people. But when you're talking about, let's say, a large trade publisher, 0.04% of a few $1 billion is still a lot of money. It's still a couple $1 million. And that easily justifies whatever investment you've made in the technology many times over. And if you look at agencies, the benefit is really significant. It's in the high single-digit percentages. And you can look at these numbers they are significant compared to the annual revenues, which are in the tens, hundreds of millions, or even billions of dollars. And if we look at the numbers with respect to the revenue benefits versus the cost savings benefits, the cost efficiency benefits, what we found is that the revenue benefits tended to outweigh the cost efficiency benefits by more than a factor of 6. And this is consistent with analysis that I've done with clients over the years when they're trying to justify whether it's rights management or content management, digital asset management, workflow, whatever system they're looking to put in. The revenue benefits tend to be a lot larger in magnitude than the cost benefits that you could realize by putting in a system of that nature. So finally, I want to tell you about some of the emerging themes that came out of this analysis. And there were really 3 of them that stood out. One is the power of data analysis. If you get your hands on all this data and you're able to look at it easily through charts and graphs and spreadsheets and whatnot, you can tell things like, we're not charging enough here. We're not doing enough sales effort in this market, let's say a geographic market. Or here's some deals that we should revisit that we looked at a few years ago. Things of that nature that you can really only tell by having all the data in front of you in a convenient way that you can look at it. The importance of incremental revenue. Rights is becoming a bigger piece of publishing revenue overall, and that's been a trend that's been going on for quite a while. Incremental revenue through capacity expansion is really a better way of looking at this than how much money can we save with our existing staff or how much staff can we cut or whatever. It's much more beneficial quantitatively to look at this as what incremental revenue can we drive through this, as opposed to how many pennies can we save. And then the final emerging theme is the increased criticality of third-party online licensing agencies, which provide scale, easy scale. You don't have to hire people. Instead, you hire an agency that itself has scalable capabilities and enables you to maintain incremental revenue increases much more easily. So those are the themes that emerged from our analysis. And once again, we'll be entertaining questions during the Q&A of this webinar. And anyone who wants to get a copy of the 20-some page paper from BISG, Virtue Sales will be giving information about how you can get a copy of that, and that will be provided gratis from BISG. So thank you. And I think I just hit around 10 minutes, close enough to 10 minutes. So we'll move on.
All right, Bill, that was great. Thanks very much. All right, before we dive into a little bit more of what Bill was talking about, we're going to have a couple of first-person accounts of working with the new technology and how that's paid off. So Karen, I was hoping you could start us off with just giving us, kind of an overview of what life's been like in the technology and rights world.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. My name's Karen. I'm the subsidiary rights manager at Harvard University Press. I think it's helpful or instructive to understand the way we work today by looking a little bit at the way we used to work. So Harvard has always had a very small but active and engaged licensing program where we have always actively pursued translations and audio deals, dramatic deals, etc. But the problem that we have always historically faced, which I think is true for a lot of publishers, is that our department is by far the leanest department, which is to say that we've traditionally only had a subsidiary rights manager who was responsible for attending the book fairs, preparing the rights guide, maintaining relationships with authors on both the front list and the back list, negotiating deals and chasing money. We have a department assistant who handles the drafting of contracts, the basic correspondence, securing production assets, sending author comp copies. And then we have one person who's dedicated strictly and solely to permissions licensing, because as an academic nonfiction publisher, that is a significant part of our licensing program. So when I joined Harvard 10 years ago, I got to witness firsthand the systems that they had been using for decades, which was an entirely analog system. So What that meant was that when a new license was negotiated, it would be transferred via a typewriter to a 5x7 note card on which we would record by hand sales figures from the statements that we managed to receive in a given year. We never actually chased down those statements, but we would handwrite in sales, copies sold, how much we received, how much we split with the author. And so, for a book that, was licensed in the 1950s and has been in print in since the 1950s, you would expect to see 4 note cards filled out front to back with tiny, cramped handwriting that was barely legible. So heaven forbid an author would ever ask us how many copies a translation sold, because then you'd have to pull the cards, pray that it was up to date, and then pull out a calculator and manually sum it. So when I came in as a millennial and was told that I'd have to handwrite anything, I was just like appalled, and immediately went out and bought a book that basically taught me how to build a rudimentary relational database so that I could start digitizing this information. And that wound up being like a phase 1 before we migrated to our current system of record, which is the Biblio Iii System. So Biblio Iii is our database of record for everything. It holds our bibliographic data for our titles, both front list and back list. It holds our author contracts. It processes our royalties, and it also houses my subsidiary rights deals. So what this means is that it's a one-stop shop for me to do everything that I would need to do as a subsidiary rights manager. So I'm able to see either on a title basis or on a seasonal basis or on a BISAC code or whatever criteria I can think of, what rights I have. Do I have translation rights? Do I have audio rights? I can also see terms of the contracts with our authors. So do authors have approval over like narrator selection or over particular languages or selection of publishers? I'm also able to drill down into those individual licenses and see, where we are in the life cycle. Have we circulated contracts? Have we notified the author? Has it published? Have we sent copies? Is it due for renewal? Is it time to, renegotiate? And I also generate my rights catalog out of this database where I can dump out via XML all of our catalog copy and bibliographic data that then gets sent into an InDesign tagged template. So, the cost savings and just time of doing all of these tasks that were once a very manual, laborious process, it's just, you can't quantify how much time is saved. So what this enables me to do is be able to spend more time, thinking about the list in a more abstract way, being able to look at a seasonal list and figure out which titles are doing particularly well. What backlist titles might be surging in interest, and how might we replicate that in another market? What opportunities might there be to increase revenue? It also has fundamentally changed, I think, a little bit the way the press thinks about subsidiary rights. So a lot of the information that I'm gleaning from the performance of our lists and of our backlist feeds upwards into acquisitions, so that when we acquire new projects, we're often thinking about, well, does this book seem like a good licensing opportunity for us? Is this something that we should aggressively pursue securing subsidiary rights for? So all of which is to say that, not only has my day-to-day workflow changed drastically and, more efficiently and for the better, it's also, I think, changed the way the entire press thinks about this, potential revenue streams.
Great. One thing before we let you go, it sounds like you were there for the installation of whatever technology you have implemented. Could you give us a brief rundown of how painful or how easy that was to do?
So my impatience to do away with the note cards, which were the bane of my existence, I think put us on the right path to make it a relatively seamless transition for the subsidiary rights. That being said, it's still a little tricky to prepare yourself for a migration to another database, especially when it comes to things like putting in author contracts and developing a vocabulary and looking at the templates that you've had over the years and coming up with a standardized understanding of what those templates mean and how they should be interpreted. But I think that when you approach it with the right mindset and with a clear vision of what you want to be able to do, it's not as onerous as a lot of people, I think, make it out to be.
And then one last quick thing, to get the implementation going, was it a hard sell to the management? Or are they on board with that from the get-go? Or?
No, so I came in as a department assistant and then had moved up to subsidiary rights manager in maybe a couple years. And my boss, my direct manager, was the subsidiary rights manager and could obviously be persuaded to see that there are so many efficiencies to be had by having a more digital based workflow. And I was fortunate in that she trusted me to implement, my stopgap vision before we went to Biblio. Now, it just so happened that our editorial department was interested in having a more robust bibliographic database anyways. And so basically our interests aligned, and we were able to move forward with one database to do it all. But it wasn't hard to get buy-in, because I think that everybody understands that when you have better data, you can build efficiencies in your workflow and potentially convert more for any given title. So I think that part was easy.
Sure. Okay, great. All right. Becky, can you talk to us for a few minutes about what it's like over in the Candlewick rights department?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks to PW and to Virtue Sales. I'm Becky Hemperly. I'm the VP of Contracts, Rights, and Royalties at Candlewick Press, which is a children's book publisher located in Somerville, Massachusetts. But we are part of the Walker Books group. So our sister company is Walker Books in London, and we also have Walker Books Australia in Sydney. So one of the things that was really important for us as a group as we were looking at systems, and I will say that I've been at Candlewick for 20 years, and Candlewick was the first US publisher to take on Virtue Sales' Biblio system. And there was a fair amount of, first of all, those were early days. We've been live with the system since 2006. So obviously rights and systems have grown up a lot during that time. But one of the things that was key for us, being an international company, was that we needed to be able to share information seamlessly across all of the companies, to have all eyes on the same data, which was an interesting challenge, I think, for Virtue Sales, because at that point, I'm not sure, I think we may have been there first in terms of an international installation. But looking at things like workflow and bibliographic data and conversions of weights and measures into different, inches versus millimeters, currency, all of that kind of thing, all that information got poured into the development that we did in implementing the Biblio system. But I like to say that we sort of retrofit an infrastructure when we did this, because prior to having one centralized database, everyone had his or her own little Excel spreadsheets, right? And whether that was the pub schedule, whether that was, financial information, which of course quickly became out of sync, out of date. And something as simple as putting out a catalog was this, 3-month nightmare, because, by the time the circulation went around, half that information had become out of date. So, then you were starting all over again. So the thing about having, as Karen very, very nicely said, the thing about this Biblio system is rights are more than just subsidiary rights. When you're selling rights, let's face it, contracts, rights, those are the assets of the company. Those are the documents that give you as a publisher the ability to publish the book. I mean, without that, you're nowhere. So having that information centralized to say, these are the rights we have. This is the bibliographic data. This is the schedule, the delivery schedule. This is the production. These are the subsidiary rights. All of that goes together. You can't sell rights. You can't manage rights in a vacuum, because all of those other elements come into play. Whether you're putting together a rights guide, you need that metadata. For us, we're a children's book publisher, heavily illustrated materials. So we have a digital asset management system that is part of Biblio. And so all of our book files live there, so that when you are licensing out to another publisher, you can provide those files more easily. When you're creating rights guides or title information sheets, you can draw all of that information into what you are using, the tools you're using to sell those rights. So this is about a rights management system, but I would say that a rights management system has to be robust enough to encompass all of those elements. It needs to have the production schedule, because if you're doing a co-edition printing with a foreign rights publisher, you need to know when you're printing your own copy in order for other people to run on with you. So it is a core, rights, in my mind, are the core of the business. Now I might be a bit biased, but really you're sort of nowhere without knowing what you're doing with your rights. And I would say that particularly in these times, for people working remotely, certainly we were at something of an advantage because we were already working remotely from our UK and Australian colleagues. So we knew a little bit of how to do that. But obviously the pandemic has completely upended so much in the world, including things like rights fairs, the Frankfurt Book Fair, Bologna Book Fair for us in the children's world. Those things, people are just not getting together. The licensing show that deals with merchandise licensing rights or Kidscreen or any of those kinds of things, you need to have the ability to be nimble and work in this sort of ever-evolving environment. And I would say that having a rights system where you can output the information, you can easily share it, gather it, has enabled our foreign rights team and those who sell audio rights, my colleagues who sell audio rights or book club rights or whatever, to just simply carry on. And rights, as you were saying, Bill, is, it's gone from being a nice to have to a need to have for publishers, because that is not just ancillary income anymore. It is really central to the business. Certainly in terms of the efficiencies that you were talking about, if you had said to me before we had this central database, tell me all the books where we have audio rights. Well, that would have been a very painful manual exercise to try to pull that data together. Look at what's happened with the ebooks and the digital world. We would not have been able to really get into the digital space if we didn't know which books we had ebook rights to and what approvals might exist, or any of those kinds of things. So pulling together that rights information, whether you're doing it for a rights guide or whether you're just doing it for a checking, author check, then you get into the element of the sub-rights income and the royalties income. We work hard to get these rights from our authors and illustrators, and it is incumbent on us to be good stewards of them. And that means exercising the rights, and it also means making sure we are staying on top of receiving royalty statements from licensees, payments from licensees, knowing when those deals are about to expire so that we can renew them or decide whether to renew them based on how a licensee has performed. So all of that, certainly when authors and illustrators are core to our business at Candlewick and Walker. And so being able to provide good service to them and to show that we are managing their rights well is always important, but it has been helped enormously by having this this database system.
Great. One thing maybe slightly off topic, but you brought up the pandemic and no book fairs and any things like that. Has Candlewick done anything to try to replace no Bologna last year or no London last year in terms of the rights thing? Have they organized anything to like fill in the gap?
We have. I will say our foreign rights, we have a foreign rights team 365 days a year. So they're not waiting to sell those rights, just during the book fairs. But what they've had to be obviously more intentional about it in terms of setting up those meetings, almost conducting, I don't want to say conducting their own little book fair, but really being very intentional about, here we are going out, we are selling the spring list or whatever as they would normally be doing, again, via Zoom, being able to send those assets and materials, where they might be sitting in the booth, paging through a lovely picture book, that people will be able to touch, but the ability to draw out of our data asset management system, those same assets and supply them to licensees so that they can have that, if not the same, a similar experience of sitting together, discussing a book, looking at the book. So yes, they have definitely been doing those kinds of that more targeted outreach, and not relying on, conventions that are not happening.
Right. Yeah, sure. That makes a lot of sense. All right, great. All right, Chris, you're in the fourth spot here. I was hoping you could maybe give us a reaction to what you've heard, and from your years of experience, what's really been working in the technology field in the rights area.
Thanks, Jim. It's so inspiring to be here with other people who say things like, I think rights is the center of every publishing company, because that's what I think too. And for years, I think it was okay to think about publishing as a kind of an inventory business. We sold books out of warehouses, and I believe that we're evolving now to understand that publishing is really about the management of a portfolio of assets. And those assets include the rights that publishers acquire. And as other avenues of book sales in particular, but even in other parts of our publishing business, as those types of sales and outlets for sales have been reduced over the years. Think of the number of national accounts we had 10 years ago compared to the number of national accounts we have now. Rights has become more and more important. The old gravy notion, rights was like this nice thing that came in sometimes and who knew why it happened, is now seriously a business that we must manage, that we have to stay on top of. I think, it can sound a little intimidating when you talk about publishing companies that have been in business for a long time, have big backlists, have highly complex businesses. In a children's book world, every book has many of the books that get published have two author contracts, an author and an illustrator. Or in an academic world where there's multiple contributors to a single title, there's a lot of complexity just even at that level. And so people can think, I don't know if I should really try and make an effort to change these workflows that I have. Seems like it's working. Seems like we managed to do some things. And that's why we were so happy in the rights world and in BISG and the Rights Committee in particular to get Bill's report, which gives us a measure. I mean, I already know about a rights director that's taken that report to her bosses and said, we can make a difference if we invest a little. But I want to also say, you don't have to think right now about soup to nuts. You can do what Karen did, now some number of years later, if you're currently writing on cards, which I know from some of my consulting, there are people who are still kind of doing that, or if you're working in a publishing company where everybody has their own spreadsheets, you can start now by just beginning to consolidate some of that, by making sure that you're picking up on not having to go back to that author contract to check again, do you have the rights? Starting to consolidate and moving yourself into a position to be easily portable or convertible into a more sophisticated database when the time comes. There are just so many pieces of rights that for years were really important, required work. And I certainly had lots of assistants who, and I was one myself in my very first job or two, doing things that were really dumb, that thank goodness we have machines now. And that anybody coming into a rights department today, sure, there's always lots of admin, but it's at a level that it enables some time for more strategic thinking, for seeing up above the picture. What does this record tell me about this title? And then I'll just say one more thing, which is we really, as rights people, we're talking here about our systems and our internal stuff, but our jobs, and the part usually that most of us love the most, is talking to our customers. And the one thing we want to be able to do is answer their questions. I have what I want to sell. I made a beautiful rights guide. I came to you, I showed you my beautiful books. You're going to write me at some point and ask me about something I haven't talked about yet. And I want to answer you. I don't want to be that permission department or rights department that says, we'll get back to you in 6 weeks with an answer to that question. No other sales department would ever be allowed to have that kind of long delayed response to an inquiry. And it's still standard in some companies, especially around permission, that it takes a long time. But in my experience at Wiley, where we had a huge number of inquiries on our content, it is possible to get to a place where you turn around permission inquiries in 24 hours. It is possible to sign contracts every week and turn things around from the time you get an offer and you settle your negotiation to get the approvals in-house, generate the contract, get it out to the licensee. What that does, of course, is then speed up the time that the money's now due back in your company. And those are valuable days. When you get to the December 31st, if that's the end of your year, and you've only completed the deals you were able to get to and get that much money, that's okay. But I bet you there's emails in your inbox that if you'd had time, you'd have been able to put in 3, 5, 7. That's what Bill's report shows.
Right. Yeah, great.
So that's really important.
Absolutely. All right. Just to remind the audience, feel free to ask some questions. And we've got a couple here. This first one's for Karen. How long did it take the integration of the new workflow to be completed?
How long did it take?
Right.
So it was a 2-step process. It probably took me, and I did this by myself, it probably took me, I don't know, maybe 6 to 8 months to convert handwritten cards spanning over a century into a database. That was just me doing that on my own for my own sanity. The conversion to Biblio was actually much quicker. Once the details of what the database needed to look like and suit our needs, the import, it popped right in and the records were clean. So it was a good, that reckless, I'm going to go rogue step actually paid dividends and made the transition that much easier to a better, more robust and scalable system. So I am a big advocate of having a little bit of gumption and trying to DIY an intermediate step just so you can start to see the potential of savings and time and efficiencies and being able to answer questions, etc. But yeah, that first step was, 6 to 8 months of me just hand typing in data in a way that made sense to me at the time.
And you're able to keep up with your regular day job, I gather. Muted.
Sorry, I'm not gonna lie. I occasionally would work in the evenings just to get it done. But I mean, yeah, I was trying to set aside time every week to kind of make progress, hit a milestone, hit a number of cards that I would bring over, and anything that was too onerous or complicated or something like that, I'd set aside and keep moving. Because I mean, ultimately, it's a numbers game, right? You're just trying to get as much data as you can into the system.
Right. Okay. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. All right. This one I think is for Becky. How do folks pursue permissions licensing in, particularly regarding illustrations?
Good question. Well, certainly for most picture books, we are contracting with an illustrator for a full rights contract. So with an advance and royalties and things like that. I would say the place where we are licensing in rights, and I will say that our Biblio database, we are able to hold information about rights that we have licensed in, those sort of third-party permissions. That comes up more often if you're talking about perhaps a nonfiction book where maybe there are photographs, or for jacket art for middle grade or young adult titles. Those are the cases where we're licensing in. But we do have the ability to hold those third-party permissions. So it tells, what rights we have been granted. We can hold the documents. That's the other thing that is a big boon to having a system like this. You can hold your author contracts. You can hold sub-rights agreements. You may want to hold, again, these license agreements and be able to track when you've exceeded the number of copies, perhaps, if it's a limited license in terms of number of copies, limited term, maybe a 5-year term, so that we can keep on top of renewing them as necessary. But Bill has just put into the chat that this varies quite a bit according to the kind of industry, and that is certainly true. So I'll hand that part over to you guys.
Bill, you want to pick it up in higher ed? Unmute. There we go.
Yeah. So as Becky mentioned, you can hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. The licensing in of images varies according to what segment you're in. And in children's, you're going to be engaging illustrators, and you're going to be doing things that you wouldn't be doing, for example, in STM and higher ed. Higher ed will typically license in from other publishers, depending on what the content is. Other publishers are a common source. Stock agencies are a common source. They're very specialized stock agencies for things like medical images. If you're a medical textbook publisher, or whatever else there may be, there's a stock agency for that. And the person involved will know who those people are that they should go to for those images. And typically there'll be standing deals with those stock agencies. You're not going to get a royalty-free situation if you're licensing in for something like a textbook. It's probably pretty unusual. And so let's see. So that covers higher ed. If you get into things like medical, there are even more specialized things that you do, which I'm not as aware of as I imagine Chris is. So maybe Chris, you want to take it from here and talk about medical, or anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important point, even across all the segments, is that you can have a system where you've identified the specific rights that you're acquiring to that third-party content based first on the product, the book product, the thing that you want to publish in your company that you're going to publish and sell. And so if you're an education publisher and you want to have a textbook and a website and a course with assessments, et cetera, you want to get rights to those photos that allows all of that. A medical textbook, same thing. What are you trying to acquire? And then you want to be clear about whether or not you have the right, usually you don't, to license that third-party content onto someone who now wants to publish it in Spanish. And these systems really help you. I see some questions in the chat about, how do you decide? What do you figure out? I'm a small publisher. I think I'll put a plug in here for the BISG Rights Committee. We're working on a vocabulary, as Bill mentioned, and leading toward a taxonomy and understanding rights deals in their most generic format. And Karen mentioned it a little when she was talking about interpreting her contracts over time. So there's a set of subsidiary rights, let's say, in the industry that are often conveyed in author contracts. You need to categorize those. There are many systems that you could look at that already have those categories. You can look in your own author contract, decide those categories. Then it's a matter of yes, no. Then it's a matter of how much does the author get? If you make a deal, how much does the publishing company keep? Are there approvals involved? That basic grid can be then translated into similar kind of grid can be used then for tracking your third-party content, for tracking your royalty rates. It's just a matter of really boiling those, if you've got the brain for it, boiling those somewhat narrative author contracts down into a more of a databaseable set of points.
If I may,
The other thing I wanted to mention here is that the systems will help you track what rights you're acquiring more easily so that you don't have to acquire more than you need. And acquiring, the exact rights that you want can be done, but it's a laborious process, and it traditionally has involved the legal department. And so I was consulting to one trade publisher where they had entries for rights for things like photos. They were a very photo intensive trade publisher. And it was a text field that said things like call Bob in legal. And that's not very helpful. And if you have the easy ability to define what rights you're trying to acquire, and then you can acquire them, you end up saving a lot. And then knowing what rights you have. Oh, we can use this, but not for that. Or in this geography, but not that geography. That's also very, very beneficial information.
And to know what you know, that's great. We have another one that's probably directed towards Becky and Karen, and something actually I was thinking of. Have any of you integrated your system with an order to sales system? If so, what was your experience? Karen?
No, I don't.
No.
No, I don't believe so. No.
Oh, wow. Becky's a no too?
I guess maybe a question of what do you mean an order to sales? Our system is definitely integrated. We use Penguin Random House as our distributor, our warehouse. And so there is information that we can feed from our Biblio database to Penguin Random House. And of course, they're huge and they have their own systems, but certain bibliographic information and those kinds of things, yes, there is a pathway. I will say there are also, we have interfaces to a separate finance system, that generates the payments and those kinds of things. So any kind of a system that you have is again, it's as all encompassing as the system is, it still needs to connect to other systems that do specialized things like an ordering system or like a finance system.
Right. Well, maybe
Or to
picking
our
up
website. It runs our website.
Right. Maybe pick up on this a little bit. Are there ways that you could use the system to automate selling rights through? There's platforms out there like PubMatch, and some of the Frankfurt has its own fair system you can buy and sell. Does this system play into that, or do you guys not have any interest? Either Candlewick or Harvard.
We have not used it to interface with those systems. Again, because we have teams who are out there selling the rights, really what we're using is, a better tool to manage the rights we have and to really to manage the income that comes from those rights. And again, to the BISG report about the data analysis about those rights. And so that we can be smarter about the rights that we are licensing, and say, here's an opportunity, or here's a licensee who maybe is not the best licensee for that particular book. But,
Right. Okay.
Jim, I could say a little bit about the marketplace if you want me to. First in the permissions world, there is a self-serve permissions function that's part of the Copyright Clearance Center and part of PLS Clear in the UK. Maybe a few other countries also have a centralized place that an inquirer could go and say, I'd like to reproduce this chapter in my book. May I please acquire the rights? And by answering a series of questions, they can then receive a price, which they could pay with their handy credit card. And then receive a license that allows them to do certain things. So that the Copyright Clearance Center marketplace or the their widget. Why am I blanking on the name, Bill? You know what it is. Rights link on STM. Yeah. So those are really in use by a lot of different kinds of publishers and work. Well, there are also now some up and coming, over a course of a couple of years now, up and coming potential marketplaces for trade and academic titles to foreign publishers. And I think the publishers that have participated in those do that in the spirit of having as much discovery possible of their titles, being able to have your books out on any kind of platform where potential licensees are shopping is a positive thing. We're all doing that, right? We take our rights guides, we leave them all over the place, we email them to everyone, we put them up on our rights websites, and definitely in favor of having them. Many people are in favor of having them on platforms like PubMatch or Frankfurt Rights. There's a couple other ones in Europe. There's a French one, there's a German, Austrian-based one, Swiss-based maybe, but there's a little bit of a gap in our business that I always like to remind people, and someday my dream will come true, that there would be a place you could go and say, who has the Italian rights to Girl on a Train or the Barack Obama book? And you struggle to get answers to those kind of questions. PW does a good job of putting in the agent's name at the end of the books they review, which is helpful because very often if the rights aren't controlled by the publisher, they're controlled by an agent. However, if the rights are already licensed, if you write the publisher by mistake and it should be the agent, again, there's delays in that process. And if you're not asking about Barack Obama and you're not maybe a major translating country, your request moves further down the line, takes longer to answer. So having a centralized database would be awesome, where people could just find out the basics of where to go even to get the answers to their questions.
Sure. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. So Karen, if you had a wish list and something you'd like to see Biblio or somebody else develop, what would it be?
A wish list.
What would be the top of that wish list?
I think my primary wish list entails better tracking, at least for our purposes, of third-party rights. Being an academic publisher, a lot of our text content is sometimes repurposed journals, which we try to discourage, but occasionally happens, or it includes figures that come from other sources as well. And the nature of the permissions that you get for it is kind of fuzzy. And this is a thing where I feel like a proper taxonomy would be very helpful for understanding what constitutes one edition, what constitutes one-time use, that kind of thing. But a way of tracking those minute details that helps me understand, can can this content flow through with the book if I'm licensing translation rights? Does it prohibit me from licensing rights to the chapter in full because the content is still in context? These are the kinds of things that I think Harvard is really engaged with addressing right now, and is like the final frontier for us, is getting a grip on this third-party content and how it can migrate with the book as we try to exercise our rights and maximize revenue streams.
Great. Becky, how about you?
In terms of a wish list,
Right.
well, it's certainly, I mean, one wish is somewhat coming true in that rights and the importance of rights is really being recognized, you know, which has been a long time coming. So, you know, for the work that BISG is doing and taxonomy work and the report, I think those are big steps forward. Certainly, again, the way the industry is changing, people just realize that those are important dollars that are coming in. In terms of system wish list, you know, there is the pie in the sky thing about, oh, wouldn't it be nice you could put in all your contractual terms and it could just, you know, spit out an author head contract. For trade publishers, that's not terribly realistic. There are just too many special terms, things like that. There are certain kinds of agreements, you know, maybe fee permissions agreements or something that's fairly straightforward. Karen, I know that, you know, you're doing the right sold letters out of Biblio, which is terrific. So that there are ways to pull that information, continue to pull that information out of the system and repurpose it so that you're not, I mean, the worst thing in the world is rekeying data, right? So you don't want to have to do that. It introduces errors, it's a waste of time. And it means that data might not be accurate. So finding, you know, new and better ways to continue doing that would be great. I will say that there is also a great deal of innovation going on that we're finding, certainly because we deal with a lot of schools and libraries, again, because of the way the world has shifted. Online education platforms, ebooks, subscription services, those kinds of things have become an ever greater part of the business, and that's all about rights. So, you know, that is an area that is bound to keep growing even when kids can go back to school. So we're not putting that genie back in the bottle, and we should be ready to continue to innovate in those spaces.
All right, great. Okay, super. All right, Bill, you had the first word. What's your final takeaway from here?
Final takeaway is, I don't know, I guess what we were trying to do with the report is give people tools to go talk to their management about investing in rights management. And I'm happy to hear from Chris that at least one person's already done that. So, you know, Becky and Karen are living, breathing examples of how you make this work over a period of years. And there's a lot of opportunity to follow their example is where I would leave it.
Great. And that's a great place to leave it. Well, thank you everybody for attending. Once again, please fill out the survey that hopefully will be popping up any second. And again, we'd like to thank Virtual Sales. And the BISG report will be available. And I think Virtual Sales will reach out to you on how you can get that. And on behalf of PW and everybody who took part in this today, thank you very much. And this was the fastest hour on rights discussion I've ever had. So I thank you all for that. Over and out.